Welcome to 27 Topics. Our guest today is Eric Schansberg. Eric is a professor of economics at IU Southeast in New Albany and has written a number of books and many other things, and we're running for Congress of the 9th Congressional District. And, we just have a couple of days left here before the election. And, Eric, this fall we certainly were hit with something that affected everybody, and that was the collapse of the financial markets.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of viewpoint of what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, gas prices were the number one issue, and now it's a financial crisis, and now gas prices it's amazing how far that's fallen off the front page. But in terms of the financial crisis, it goes way back. I mean, you can go back to the 70s and talk where the government was encouraging lenders and borrowers to get homes they really weren't well suited to purchase. You've got the government involved with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and I'm hard-pressed to find in the Constitution where the government should be involved in home mortgages. And then when the government's involved in stuff, then often they will subsidize risky behavior. So if it's understood that there will be a bailout, then people know they can take additional chances because they'll pocket the rate of return if they succeed, and the government will back them up if they fail. And that's what we've seen in the last year. The government's been trying to bail out this economy and sectors of this economy for the last year, trying to stem off what would be otherwise presumably a mild recession. So we've gotten ourselves in all sorts of trouble. To the bailout in particular, we've really messed around with our money and banking systems, and those are based on trust and faith. And when that faith and trust are violated, then no one knows what will happen. So no one knows whether we would have had an apocalyptic scenario if there was no bailout, and we don't know what will happen even with a bailout because we're in unknown territory. In my view, the risk of apocalypse is far greater with the bailout. And then on top of that, just how this changes fundamentally the way that the government's involved in the economy is horribly troubling. To have the government nationalizing banks and those sorts of things will have long-run ramifications for the economy. And any time you move from the market to government, that needs to be, that should be a very sobering move.
So, you look at that this trouble has really started, like you said, back in the 70s. If elected to represent the 9th District, what would your recommendations be for your constituency here in Indiana when you went to Washington?
Staying with the bailout for a few more minutes, I would vote against any of those bailouts that we've had in the last year. Barron Hill should be credited with that. He voted as well against the bailout the last 2 times. Politically, I wish he had voted for the bailout. It would have made things easier for me, but he made the right call on those votes, and I do deeply appreciate him making what I think is the right decision there. Beyond the bailout, we're just in a mess in terms of our financial house. All the debt and the spending had driven down the dollar. That's why we were paying higher gas prices and food prices, because the dollar has been devalued so much under President Bush and his Congresses, all this spending and debt we've had. And in terms of how much debt we can have, no one knows the answer to that question. So we don't know whether we're 500 feet from the edge of a cliff or 5 miles from the edge of that cliff. But what we can say is that we're in a car driving the wrong direction quickly. And unless we turn that car around, we risk driving our country off of a cliff. And so we need to bring people to Washington who are fiscal conservatives. And in this race, I'm the only one that counts for that. I would receive an A from the watchdog groups, the National Taxpayers Union, Club for Growth, and Citizens Against Government Waste. Mike Sodrell receives, on average, about a C from those groups. And Barron Hill, despite his wonderful vote on the bailout, receives an F from those groups because of his votes on other spending. So I think we need to restore fiscal sanity to Washington. There's only about 24 voices in Washington right now, but we've seen what even 3 or 4 dozen people can do in Washington as they got drilling back on the table. And we need to do the same thing with fiscal conservatism. We need people to be there, shouting from the rooftops that we cannot spend and raise debt like we've been doing the last 8 years.
Well, we've gone into debt tremendously in the last number of years. Well, it's however many you want to go. It's really gone into debt. You know, and you have to be physical conservative in order to maybe balance the books down the road. What are some of the recommendations that, ways that the government can do this? I think whoever is elected president or back to Congress is going to have some restraint.
Mm-hmm. I think the overarching problem is that we look to the federal government to solve problems that really shouldn't even be approached by the federal government. We take state and local problems and we ask Washington to fix them, and they say, sure, send us some money. They take a cut of the money, they attach strings to it, they send some of the money back to us and say, hey, fix your problems. And so why is there a role for government in terms of health care, in terms of education, in terms of welfare? Those are state and local problems that should be dealt with at the state and local level. If we did that, then that would take care of the national financial crisis in terms of debt very quickly. Our military involvement is another huge one. I'm the only candidate who's seriously opposed to our ongoing efforts in Iraq. We need to bring our troops home in the next 10 to 12 months, and our interventionist foreign policy is horribly costly. I respect but disagree with those who say we ought to stay in Iraq indefinitely, but I would say to them that they need to finance that effort with current dollars rather than using a credit card. So I think if we were to cut back if we were to go back to what President Bush ran on in 2000, which was not to nation build, not to engage in interventionist foreign policy as President Clinton had done for different motives, you could cut the defense budget. If you got these government out of the areas of education and the federal government out of the areas of education and health and those sorts of areas, there'd be plenty of money to eliminate the debt easily.
Turning the page a little bit to some of your key positions, pro-life.
Yeah, I mean, some other things that distinguish us. I mean, voters have, I think, an easy choice in this election. I mean, in terms of Planned Parenthood, I'm the only candidate who has not already taken your money to give to Planned Parenthood. So if that bothers you, you have a choice. In terms of energy subsidies, Baron Hill wants to take your money and give it to alternative energy companies. Mike Sodrell wants to take your money and give it to alternative energy companies and oil companies. And I don't want to take your money and give it to anybody. You should be allowed to keep your own money, and no one should ever vote to take your money to give to a company. There are other policies that don't see the light of day because they're too politically dangerous. And I think we need to elect people who have the knowledge and the courage to speak to those issues. Two examples of that would be payroll taxes, or FICA, a 15.3% tax on every dollar you earn under $100,000. And even if you're working poor, if you're below the poverty line, the government hits you up for tremendous amounts of money, and yet the Democrats never talk about that. Or Social Security, it's well known that it's insolvent, but what about that great 1% rate of return they give you? The working poor and the middle class, that's their nest egg, and the government takes all their money for all these years and then dribbles it back to them at a 1% rate of return. We need people who have the knowledge, the competence, and the candor to speak to these sorts of issues. There's far too many important things to do. Life is too short. If I get sent to Washington, I will speak forcefully to these issues. Voters talk about wanting change. Well, here's an opportunity for true change. An economics professor, highly qualified, ready to take on these issues. And 40% of voters nationwide claim to be independent. And again, if you're independent, here's a chance to exert that independence and choose a credible third-party candidate.
Well, how do 40% of the people say they're independent?
That's what they claim. They don't want to. I think it's that they don't want to be Democratic or Republican is most of it, because you see a lot of discontent with the two major parties. You see a lot of voting in this district and elsewhere where it's not so much for one candidate or another, it's against one candidate or another. And if people have the occasion to actually embrace a candidate that they like and respect, I think that's a wonderful thing. And so I think we need to come back to a day where the parties are respected. They've both drifted so far from speaking to what the public needs and wants. And the major party candidates oftentimes engage in mudslinging. They don't speak to the big issues of the day. They're content to grab for power for another 2 years instead of speaking to the key issues of the day.
like we said at the beginning, the election is just roughly a week away, a little bit over a week when this program airs. And what are some of the other issues that you would like to bring to light?
Well, I think let's go back to healthcare for a minute. For those that believe healthcare can be solved by the government, and I don't, okay, but let's just assume that for a moment. Why would you want the federal government to engage in a single, highly risky federal experiment with healthcare? Even if you believe the government is the solution to our woes in that arena, why not try 50 different state-based experiments? Massachusetts has tried something. Let's learn from what they've done wrong. Oregon has tried something. Let's learn what they've done wrong and done right. Let's learn from those experiences and try it at the state level instead of engaging in a single risky experiment. There's so many areas where we look to the federal government to solve things, and they are ill-equipped. It is against the Constitution. It is inefficient. It is inequitable. We need to not look to the federal government so much. We need to look to the state and local governments, and even better, to look for private solutions to these sorts of problems.
Why do you think it is that people go to the federal government? Is it because state governments are not willing to address these issues? Is that why people we need help and they turn to Washington?
I think people look for help wherever they can find it, I think, is the main thing. And I can tell you, when I was in the forum in New Albany 2 years ago, we got a question about local police. And I felt the temptation. I didn't come close to giving into it, but I felt the temptation when someone asked, how can we put more police in the streets? And here are federal candidates being asked about how you put more police on the streets of New Albany. Well, that's really not a federal problem. But it's tempting for the politician to say, absolutely, I can fix that for you. We can have a federal program that puts police on the streets of New Albany and Charlestown and Jasper. It's tempting for politicians to try and give us that. So I think part of it is voters have voted for the same thing for years and years. We want the government to do things for us, and we forget that, well, it costs money to do that. And in particular, if you ask the federal government to do things for you, maybe someone else picks up the tab on your particular earmark or your particular spending or your particular project, but your money's being taken to pay for the similar projects in Colorado and Vermont. And instead of looking to Colorado and Vermont to pay for police in New Albany, we ought to look to people in New Albany and Indiana to pay for police in those areas.
Eric Schansberg, he's running for Congressional District 9. And Eric, you have 2 minutes to give a convincing close to the program.
Okay. Well, I appreciate consideration from voters. I mean, I know we're busy mowing our lawns and raising our kids, and we don't think about politics much, and it's wonderful to be in a country where we don't have to pay attention to politics every day. That's a great blessing from God. But the flip side of that coin is, because we don't pay much attention, we typically vote on the basis of party or 1 or 2 issues, and we don't pay much attention, and so all kinds of shenanigans can occur. But now some of those chickens have come home to roost. And as we look at this financial crisis and we look at all the problems that we're dealing with right now, maybe it's time to pay a little more attention to politics. And in particular, maybe it's time to do something a little different than what we've done the last 100 years. We've voted for all the problems we've brought upon ourselves, and it's time to look outside the two-party system to other alternatives. And in particular, maybe it'd be useful to send someone to Washington who knows something about economics. I've used that line throughout the campaign, and these days it's not all that funny anymore because we've gotten ourselves into all kinds of trouble. Ideally, government would be a junkyard dog that would take care of property and life and liberty, and that's what libertarians believe in, and that's what the Constitution talks about, that you don't want to cross that dog, but the dog should not be left outside the fence. The libertarian candidate for governor, Andy Horning, I'm going to borrow a line from him, but he said, it's amazing that 200 years ago, a lot of smart people got together and put the Constitution together. And it's not often that smart people go into politics. And we're foolish to throw that away. The Constitution is a wonderful document. It's worked for a long time. And if we're a people that say we follow the law, then we need to follow the Constitution. I'd encourage you to read it. It doesn't take that long, maybe a half hour of your time. Read the Constitution. Hold your politicians to it. It's the right thing to do by the law, and it's the right thing to do because it works. and we need to return to what the Founding Fathers talked about in terms of limited government. Government should be small, strong in its function to defend the borders and to take care of police and that kind of stuff to defend us. But other than that, government needs to be reined back terrifically so that we can have more freedom, lower taxes, and a much greater life.
Thank you. Eric Schansberg, candidate for the 9th Congressional District. Be sure to vote on November the 4th. Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you, Paul.